Have you found yourself navigating a dark night of the soul? Are you craving a deeper connection with the divine feminine? Are you ready to integrate the balanced union of the masculine and feminine within? Then let's get started on the journey towards wholeness to reclaim your sovereign soul. My name is Cynthia Clark. Over the past several decades, I have undergone many dark nights of the soul. My healing journey has been a reclamation of my sovereign divinity. Whether you're just starting out on your self-healing journey or have been exploring techniques for many years, Discover Divinity offers an opportunity to uncover the new possibilities for discovering and reclaiming the innate wisdom within. It is time to discover the new possibilities. It is time to discover you. What if healing didn't start with fixing, but with feeling? In this episode, Returning to Presence, Mindfulness, Self-Compassion, and the Sovereign Soul, we are exploring how mindfulness and self-compassion can become powerful allies on the journey through trauma, spiritual awakening, and emotional reclamation. My guest, Sara, shares how her path led her to these practices and how they've helped her and others find balance, presence, and peace. We will explore the difference between self-compassion and self-pity and how to begin mindfulness in everyday life and what it means to return to your emotional truth. If you are rising through the dark night of the soul or learning to integrate the divine feminine and masculine energies, this episode is your invitation to pause and come home to yourself. Welcome to the Discover Divinity podcast, Reclaim Your Sovereign Soul. My name is Cynthia Clark, the founder of Discover Divinity and discoveringdivinity.com. And today's episode is all about those of us that are coming from a space of rising through that dark night of the soul, healing deep wounds, and reclaiming our sacred sovereignty. Here we are honoring wholeness. We're exploring what it means to balance the divine feminine and the divine masculine within, and to step out of conditioning that taught us to disconnect from our truth. In today's episode, we are diving into two deeply supportive practices on the healing path, that of mindfulness and self-compassion. My guest, Sara Pinson, is sharing her journey today, one of which is very transformative. And as she shares, we're going to be exploring parts of her story through this conversation. But we're going to be taking those pieces so that you can apply that to you and the tools that you can carry moving forward. So welcome to the podcast, Sara.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Cynthia.
Yes, I really appreciate you. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to get started, maybe share a little bit about you and then a couple of the bullet points of what we're going to cover today. And then we're going to go ahead and get started.
Okay, sounds good.
All right, so I am super excited to have Sara Pinson. She is a mental health professional and she has a wealth of experience in mindfulness and compassion, as well as emotional well-being. Sara graduated with her master's in counseling in 2020, and during her time at a stuttering clinic at ISU, she learned about acceptance and commitment therapy, which incorporates mindfulness. And this approach has been super transformative for Sara, helping her reconnect her body and her emotions after growing up in a religious environment where those aspects weren't really embraced. And so I am looking forward to expanding this topic of mindfulness. So as we begin, we're going to explain a little bit more about what mindfulness really is and what it isn't, and then moving into how self-compassion differs from self-pity. Number 3, we will move into some simple ways to begin mindfulness even when life feels chaotic. and how to gently come back into presence when your mind is wandering. Next, we're going to focus on practices for being kind to yourself, especially during stressful or painful moments. And then understanding why softness doesn't really mean that you're weak. It actually is one of those gifts that you get to take and reclaim that into your sovereignty. So, whether you're just beginning this work or returning to it, this episode is going to offer a grounded, heart centered guidance for reconnecting with your inner wholeness. So, Sara, if you would go ahead and start to share with our audience this catalyst that brought you into your passion. So, I would love to get started there, and then we'll move into these other bullet points.
Okay. I think generally I've always had an interest in psychology, and just greater self-understanding. So that's always been something I was interested in. And then in adulthood, I had a child who was diagnosed with religious OCD. And that got me really passionate about mental health in a more specific way, led me to do my training to become a counselor. So that's kind of the psychology path. I think what led me to really be passionate about mindful self-compassion is the religious upbringing I had, where emotions were often demonized, or there's so many teachings around emotions being wrong if they don't align with the teachings of, the religion. And so giving me tools to reclaim those emotions for myself was really transformative and really powerful, and has just given me a passion to share that with others.
I love that. And I feel like, your journey, you share it in such a short point A to point B, but really looking at scrupulosity as a whole, OCD, those connections into such high demand religions that carry shame at the root, they carry fear at the root of where this can create such an internal battle within the mind. And so I can only imagine with having a loved one suffering so deeply, as well as then also battling within your own psyche and self, for those to have been parts of your dark night of the soul that was kind of that cracking, right? Kind of that crumbling, that then opened you up into self exploration, because that comes with some of those deeper emotions, especially losing. In high demand religions, we tend to come into a space of believing that we know everything, right? Because that teaches us, our source, where we come from, who we are. And when you go through something like religious trauma or scrupulosity, those things kind of go into such an extreme. And when you shake, when you get rattled, it will crumble you into a completely other side of the pendulum. That's the way I've seen it, especially with the clients that I work with, is we can go from one extreme all the way to the other. And in that dark abyss is sometimes where you have to find your grounding again and come back into a space of trust, right? Because I think we lose ultimate trust and then trying to find that for yourself again. So can you tell me a little bit more about maybe some of those moments within yourself that you did feel, kind of in that dark abyss space, some of those pieces that brought you to mindfulness, and finding it?
Well, I think, coming back to my child that had OCD, I always say, like, I've never witnessed so much suffering as watching my child struggle with that. I think that, and it's very internal in the mind, a lot of, especially scrupulosity. And so I think watching a child suffer and knowing that you don't know what to do about it, right? That powerlessness.
Mm-hmm.
Not to mention my own internal struggles of here's where my heart wants to go and here's what the religion's telling me to do. I just don't think that the religion and my upbringing really equipped me with the skills to know how to handle what was happening for my son, and then my own like internal dissonance, or conflicting values. And so I think I just slowly started to realize I didn't have that the answers weren't coming from the religion or from, prayer or anything like that. And so I needed outside help. Um, and yeah, that was part of the path for sure. And I think we'll get into this later, but something that's really powerful about mindfulness for me is it helps build your tolerance to discomfort and some of those maybe dark night of the soul moments where
Mm-hmm.
there's so much about being human that's uncomfortable and painful. And mindfulness and self-compassion give us a way to really cope with those things that I think a lot of high demand religions actually do the opposite, where they can
Mm-hmm.
exacerbate any pain,
Mm-hmm.
comfort, and just add to it.
Yes, absolutely. And I think in both things that you're speaking about, especially where individuals are taught to seek their clergy, over even seeking a counselor or a therapist or someone who is trained to be able to help with these things, a lot of times because of the upbringing, where a lot of times maybe negative thoughts or anger or shame, all of those things are believed to come from an adversarial force or an adversary. And so, especially someone who experiences extreme anxiety, OCD, different type of mental health conditions, that creates an even larger. It kind of reminds me of something that starts at the top of a mountain and then goes all the way down, all the way down. And then by the time you get down, you have this big, huge tumbleweed. And so someone who is dealing with their thoughts and believing that it's coming from some outside force, it can actually exacerbate the problem as well. And
Mm-hmm.
so for you to be able to start to take an approach of going, okay, we've got to, separate, spirituality has its place, but we also have to come into that mental arena. We have to come into that physical, emotional arena to begin to start to come into a practice where he can become, his own sovereign authority, to begin to recognize what's actually coming from him, what isn't an outside force, right? We get to recognize, okay, what is the OCD, recognizing that thoughts aren't real, feelings aren't real, starting to use some of those cognitive approaches. And so I love that you've addressed that. And so anything else you want to share on that?
I don't think so. I mean, I don't want it to come across like I'm bashing religion because I do think there can be um, or spirituality, of course, in general, there can be a lot that it can give us and it can provide community. But when it includes any kind of thing that damages emotional health, I get pretty protective. Like, no, you can't touch
Absolutely.
that. Because that's kind of what shows up with certain religions
Hmm.
quite often. And so, yeah, I guess would just add that on.
Yes, absolutely. And being able to find grounding in spirituality is going to look different for every single person.
Yeah,
And so being able to recognize toxicity,
right.
and being able to separate yourself from the toxic aspects, and then still being able to ground yourself into a spiritual practice, but especially someone who has experienced scrupulosity, OCD, sometimes that can just be traumatizing in itself. And so being able to come away from that for a time to heal,
Yeah,
to be able to use cognitive skills to come into a place where the physical, emotional, and mental fields are finding a balance, finding healing. then can a person kind of open that door into finding a safe space for their spiritual world as well.
Sure.
So yeah, I love that. And I love that you were talking a little bit about dissonance. If you can just explain that term to maybe some listeners who haven't heard it before, and how that can show up. And then maybe we'll weave that into some of those concepts of mindfulness, moving into present moment awareness without judgment, etc.
Yeah, so cognitive dissonance, I would say, is where you have a piece of information that you perceive as true, and then you receive a new piece of information that maybe conflicts, and it creates dissonance or tension. And so this could show up in lots of different ways, like learning science in school, and you thought maybe you heard one thing from one teacher and another from another, or it could be where there's dissonance between values of you always believed the world was a certain way, and then maybe an event happens in your life and you start to question that, and there's dissonance, and our brains like to resolve things, and so usually we figure out a way to resolve it. So it could be to reject that new information, it could be to take it in as the new reality. So yeah, that's kind of a summary of what dissonance is and how it kind of works.
And so for you, experiencing your own dissonance, helping your son on his healing path, where was it then that you were starting to find, we mentioned a little bit in your bio, but where was it, especially after going through your own layers of religious trauma, etc., being able to come into a safe place to explore something new that actually started to help you heal? Because this is quite a big, jarring experience, and a lot of my listeners are going to be experiencing something like this. And so that's why I think mindfulness is such a beautiful practice no matter where you're at on the spectrum. Like
Yeah.
anywhere you are from, completely religious theist person to anywhere in between, all the way over into maybe more an atheistic perspective. I feel like mindfulness is universal. It doesn't necessarily follow any religious
Right.
practice. I think it's something that can be a really safe place for someone to land. And so, for you, having gone through what you did with your son, having experienced your own dissonance, your own trauma, was this one of the first little pieces of your toolbox, or do you feel like there were some other things that led you into mindfulness?
I think it came quite a bit later. Um, so yeah, but that is what I really love about mindfulness, is that now I look at dissonance as, ooh, something's about to happen. Like something exciting is changing for me. And even though dissonance is quite uncomfortable, with mindfulness and self-compassion, I'm able to look at it as an opportunity. Feeling lost or feeling kind of anchorless can actually be a really cool place to be, because it means
Mm-hmm.
you feel new. And so I certainly didn't know about mindfulness when, everything was happening with my son. I kind of learned about it later, when I started my master's program. Even that was kind of on the tail end of my program. And
Mm-hmm.
so,
Did you
yeah.
find any other tools prior to mindfulness that you felt were also helpful? Before we get into that main topic, what else did you find that were grounding forces for you, that were helping you kind of get through? Because it really is kind of a survival mode, I think, that we go into, especially as parents, when we're trying to help our children as well as trying
Mhm.
to help ourselves. Did you find anything else that was kind of like giving you like little, it reminds me of like lily pads on a pond, that were also giving you some strength and some sustenance at that time?
Well, I think the thing that caused a lot of dissonance and kind of made me feel anchorless for a while was when I was in my master's program, I was learning about people's experiences and their emotions being valid and how to validate people's experiences and emotions. Um, and that emotions are just sources of information, that they're not good or bad. And that was so foreign to everything I had been taught that I had a lot of dissonance about it, but it was also refreshing, like something I knew deep down I always felt was true. It was like finally someone was giving me permission to claim that as that feelings matter and that they're not bad and that how I feel matters. I think that's something that in the religion I grew up in, it was very much my feelings are wrong. They should stop. They shouldn't be there at all. And so I think just that alone really started breaking things apart for me, that maybe this isn't the best way to live for me.
Yeah, and I think that does take us into ideologies, not just in religion, but in a collective society that has used fear and shame and manipulation, obligation, control, like all of these root they remind me of weeds in a garden, to stronghold control over people. And especially as children, that is what we learn, is we learn through either toxic positivity, right, where you're told, okay, we need to just always have a good attitude no matter what. And I've read some of these really interesting books from way back when, and it's interesting how they even praise little children who are not showing deep emotion. Oh, so and so was such a good little girl because they went through this and they didn't shed a tear. And I thought, yeah, it is. It's a societal pattern that's gone through our generational lines, that as we are evolving, we are recognizing through research and study that this beautiful experience of being a human is actually kind of cool. And these emotions that we're given are actually really great messengers. And that's a way that we can find these conduits into maybe parts of our inner child or parts of maybe an ancestral program that are present that just need to be heard and validated and listened to. And so when you said those words, being able to now take away that shame, because shame is one of those big roots that come into this society that make us then be afraid to feel, especially anger, right? Anger is a big one. And so when we allow ourselves healthy ways to express, to sit with ourselves when we are sad or in deep grief, or maybe we're feeling jealousy or anger, that we're able to hold space for that without judgment. And that's a new concept because especially those of us that have been raised in these systems, we've never had permission to say, oh, it's safe to be angry. Right. And being, I'm sure you teach your clients different tools to be able to mitigate anger, but that's what I am able to do with my clients, is I'm able to help them sit with anger without the judgment and only having love and compassion for that part of yourself. And I think something as well, and maybe you found this useful for your children and your child who did very specifically struggle with OCD, is once I threw shame out the window and I let go of that even being something that existed. If we were feeling shame, because that's more, I am bad, I am a mistake, I am, you're turning that inward of something that you did, that instead we just use the catalyst of something happening, of going, that doesn't make me a bad person, it's just an experience. And when we take shame out of the vocabulary and we just look at an experience, recognize where we may have hurt someone, maybe we hurt ourselves, right? And make sure that we're taking accountability for that, but not getting stuck in that drudgery of beating yourself up over and over and over and over, I feel like that's incredibly freeing for
Yeah.
anyone who suffers from any anxiety disorder, stress disorder, or
Well, or
someone who's gone through religious trauma. So,
even just the self-critical voice, like who doesn't
yeah,
have, we all have
exactly.
one. And
Yes.
so how to kind of befriend that part of you and not have it send
Mm-hmm.
drilling down into depression, but just kind of be a check in. Did you live and do that decision the way you really want to? Maybe not. Okay, let's go forward keeping that in mind, but it doesn't have to beat us up
Exactly.
horribly. It can come in with compassion.
Oh, I love that. And I think that that's a great way for us to get into a little bit more of that, those steps, right? I'm excited that you shared this part because that does help us once we do allow ourselves to have thoughts, to have feelings without that judgment, just holding
Mhm.
them with stillness. We get to move in that present moment awareness, right?
Yeah.
We get to integrate mindfulness, that self-compassion that you're talking about, without judging ourselves. And so anything else you wanted to share about that before we move on?
I don't think so. I mean, have we defined mindfulness?
I don't think we
We
have.
kind of
I mean,
talked
I've
about it.
talked, yes, I've talked a little bit about present moment awareness. But yeah, I think if there's anything else you want to add to that, I think that would be great to
Well,
dive in.
uh-huh. Yeah, I think just fleshing it out a little bit because mindfulness is really just being aware of what is. So that could be of your internal state, maybe an emotion you're feeling, noticing thoughts you're having, something happening in your body, um, and really trying to just notice what's happening or what you're experiencing without judgment and with curiosity. And so it could also be noticing what's happening externally, maybe being really aware of how each leaf on a tree looks, like using any of your five senses to just really be plugged in to what's happening in the here and now. Um, and the without judgment part, it's a practice. It doesn't have, like, you don't have to be perfect at that. Anytime you're even practicing, refocusing your thoughts or noticing judgment coming in and then trying to let it go. Like that is practicing mindfulness. So it doesn't have to be that you're perfectly zen,
Mm-hmm.
never judging yourself, never resisting anything. All it's just noticing what is.
Yes, and I think it's being okay with the monkey mind, all the
Yeah.
chatter, because people think, oh, I can't meditate, I can't be mindful because their heads won't be quiet.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, that's not the point of mindfulness. That's not the point of being still. You're going to have the sound, you're going to have the noise, you're going to have all the thoughts, you're going to have the chatter, you're going to have the what ifs, you're going to have this and that. And being able to be mindful of that in a way, I like to think of like little clouds that go across the sky, or different techniques. And I'm not sure, I think we had talked earlier about maybe some different tools
Mm-hmm.
that we can implement mindfulness. We don't necessarily have to get into that now. um, but I think it's being able to have a couple things that can guide
Mm-hmm.
us through mindfulness, because I think sometimes people get turned off by it because it's for people that keep themselves so busy all the time, either scrolling on their phone, cooking, cleaning, going from here to there. There's actually a deeper fear of them not wanting to be in the silence because
Yeah.
of what shadows and what thoughts do come up in that stillness. And so to go straight into something that's just, okay, let me just see what this is. A lot of people will avoid that. And so that's something I like to help people with is go, oh, as you're breathing, just observe clouds, that are
Mm-hmm.
floating by, and just watch your thoughts, your feelings float by like clouds, instead of taking it and buying the thought and then having the whole cycle of, oh, I had this thought, now I have this feeling, and going into the monkey mind cycle. It's being able to use those tools to help the brain have a way to slow down without getting into fear. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
And I think that it can be quite intense when we start practicing mindfulness, especially if the more we've been distracting from it, the more we've been maybe running from some things that we feel or thoughts we're scared of. And so I think like mindfulness and self-compassion have such a big payoff. Like every minute of practice is a huge investment that it really doesn't take much. I think most of us, even if we feel busy, we can admit that we could put 5 minutes aside.
Yeah.
And I do think it can be like set a timer for 2 minutes and you just sit and notice anything that happens, any sounds you hear, any thoughts that come up, trying not to judge them. It could just be 2 minutes. And then maybe as you get more comfortable, you know, make that time longer and longer, but it really doesn't take much. I think people are usually shocked at how little investment it takes to start building that muscle.
And if people are feeling a little apprehensive to just going straight into stillness, there are a lot of guided visualizations that can at least get you started. Maybe even walking you through the five senses or walking you through different exercises that can help you observe your thoughts or your feelings or your emotions so that you can kind of build that muscle as well. So that then we can get into the 2-minute timer to go, oh, I'm not used to just sitting here by myself for 2 minutes. Because for some people, 2 minutes is going to feel like forever. And,
For sure.
and so I think those are great
I,
starters.
yeah, I notice a lot with people with ADHD is they want more active mindfulness, and that works just as well. So that could be you go on a walk and try to notice things more, try to pay attention.
Yes.
It could be brushing your teeth, like most of us try to do every day, and noticing the scent and how it tastes on your tongue, and like how the brush feels on your teeth. Like all of that is mindfulness. So it doesn't have to be sitting in stillness. I think there's benefit to that because of things can come up that maybe we distract ourselves from. But there's a lot of joy and that comes in just being in the moment, whether it's brushing your teeth or eating a really delicious piece of cake or things like that.
Yeah, and I think as humans, and because of the way society is set up with the shame-based programming, the fear, but also because of technology, we're on such a fast track that we get so scattered all the time. And so to like step into those practices is going to be new for a lot of people, but it's actually what our bodies innately crave. Is we crave the stillness, we crave earth, we crave nature when we're so overstimulated. And what that technology does, or high speed, action all the time, our brains can't handle that. And that puts us into anxiety or depression. Anxiety is fear of the future. Depression is a connection to the past. And so mindfulness is so beautifully helping. There's so many studies that support the vagus nerve toning, bringing us into nervous system regulation. And so that five senses practice that you're speaking of, it sounds so simple, but it is so incredibly powerful. And I love the way that you're, telling the audience it doesn't have to be something big. You were talking earlier about some informal and formal examples of mindfulness, and just being able to just take that moment to go, oh, okay, I'm here right now. I'm sipping my tea. What does that feel like on my tongue? What does it taste like? And it's amazing how it kind of moves you into, just like you're working out at a gym. Each day that you do it, you're getting stronger and you're
Mhm.
getting stronger, and your ability to go longer and longer is going to happen more and more. And then you're going to have less tendency to want to be scrolling or numbing out on uh, devices and different things like that.
Yeah, for sure. And it's a constant ebb and flow for me personally. Um, the pull of technology is strong, like the pull of watching Netflix is strong. So I know when
Mm-hmm.
oh, I'm like I'm scrolling through reels more, or I'm like watching more TV, and I can tell there's that I'm just not handling my emotions as well. And I think there's a place for distraction too, and just taking a break.
Mm-hmm.
We don't always have to be mindful and like perfectly present. I think it's okay.
Yeah.
Um, but there is that kind of dance of, is this serving me at this point? Is it too much? Is it time to, kind of vamp up my practice of mindfulness? And because a lot of the devices aren't truly restful, even
Mm-mm.
though they have their place of, sometimes we just need to distract when we're overwhelmed and take a break
Yes.
that way. And that's what we do.
Of course. Yeah, I think it's all about finding balance. And when we do find that we are, in more of stress mode, when the heart's palpitating and we're feeling like, wow, it feels like I'm having impending doom for no reason, or I'm feeling depressed, or I'm not, I'm just not feeling like myself. When we get bombarded by all of these outside messages, the news, things that are going on around us, that can create that, because our subconscious doesn't know the difference between real or imagined. And so the subconscious is going to latch on to all of this information, therefore creating body responses. So if you're watching something that's highly violent, or you're listening to something that's happening that's, overstimulating, it's going to stimulate your nervous system as well. And
Mhm.
so just being able to find what you can energetically, emotionally, mentally handle, and being able to find a healthy balance is great advice.
Yeah.
Yeah. And earlier you had mentioned, especially for individuals like with ADHD or people that get distracted by the monkey mind, um, you know, that I think can be a resistance, but also being able to lean into that next part of, implementing self compassion, because we've learned so much how to judge ourselves. Like, I think we learn judgment from outside forces our whole life, and then we end
Mhm.
up becoming the punisher, right? It's like the Cartman triangle, where we're either playing the victim, the punisher, or the rescuer in this thing called life. And yet, what's happening is we're doing that with ourselves, and we tend to, judge. Well, I can't do this, like this and this and this. And so, what would be your advice to be able to help someone like lean into self compassion, step out of that self judgment, so that they're not getting stuck in that rut?
Well, I think again, it can be baby steps. Um, if this is really difficult for someone, and then of course I recommend therapy. Go to therapy,
Mm-hmm.
get some individual help with like navigating the self-critical voice, or this or this judgment we've internalized. Like, get someone to walk with you through that process, and who has some skills for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But if you just want to do it on your own, I think it's kind of practice, practice of sitting mindfully with something. And we can run through like an example of what it could look like, um, if you want to do that.
That'd be wonderful. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, but I guess I think of it a lot as like water dripping on a rock. If we think of like, our heart doesn't want to take in kindness, or like if we were to say kind things to ourselves, our heart doesn't want to take it in. It's like a rock. But if you keep dripping water on it and keep saying, those phrases, or keep trying to have the judgmental part of you step aside so you can extend compassion to yourself, then water is pretty powerful, and eventually it will kind of break the rock or make a dent in it. And so it's really practice like that, over and over again, even if it doesn't feel like it's having an effect. I think trusting the process, that one day you'll be able to receive that compassion you're trying to give yourself.
I love that. That's beautiful. And what a great way to implement the practice and being able to just start to identify what is going on in our bodies. Because in the school system, we learn about reading, writing, arithmetic. We maybe get a gym class here and there, but most of the time we don't learn these critical human skills. And I'm like, I definitely would be an advocate to see more of this being implemented in our school systems so that children can learn how to even navigate their emotions in their
Yeah.
body. And when we were talking prior, you had mentioned this. We just went through this practice, but you'd mentioned something about being able to learn how to name your emotions, being able to find that in the body. And what do you do with your client, like once you have them sit with themselves, find what's going on in the body? How do you walk a client through that as well?
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, first of all, I'll say before even starting self-compassion practices, I think it's helpful to just practice mindfulness, to just
Mm-hmm.
start getting more comfortable with sitting with things
Mm-hmm.
as they are, because as we add self-compassion, it can kind of intensify the experience sometimes. And so it's just helpful to have like a foundation, and to know
Mm-hmm.
when it's too much for you and when to just take a break and
Mm-hmm.
go do something else.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think sometimes just learning how to name our emotions is like huge. Like most of us weren't even taught how to do that.
Mm-mm.
And so even that can be really powerful experience, getting like one of those, they have so many feeling wheels online
Mm-hmm.
where it's just like a pie chart of emotions. Um, Even kind of just following your gut and like, what is it? What do I think I'm feeling right now? And being able to name it. And then when you name it and you think of maybe what brought that emotion up, a lot of times we sense something in our body. It might be tension in our chest, or maybe constriction of the throat, or like a pit in your stomach, just wherever you feel that emotion. And then I know this often sounds weird to people, but I have clients touch themselves in a loving way there. So if it's in the chest here, or just like a gentle hug around the stomach, you feel that pit in your stomach, to start showing yourself that loving kindness. Um, and for a long time, that can be all you need to do, is just acknowledge this is here, this is difficult for me to feel, and imagine opening space in the body to just let it exist.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that's enough. For a long time, that's enough to just help us get comfortable with our
Mm-hmm.
emotions.
Yes.
Over time, we'll move into practice where it's saying those self-compassionate phrases like, it's difficult for me to feel this way.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay for me to feel this way. Everyone gets scared, kind of connecting you to all humans experience fear.
Mm-hmm.
And there's nothing wrong with you for feeling that way. And then maybe, what do I need? What do I need right now? Do I need to ask for a hug? Do I just need to give myself permission to feel this?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I'm noticing I'm hungry and maybe I need to eat something, like
Mm-hmm.
getting more practice of turning towards your experience with that kindness and permission to just be human, and then learning, what might I need? Is there an action that's needed, or can I just sit here and this is enough to just acknowledge what I'm feeling?
Yes. And in the work that I do, especially with my emphasis in inner child work, and we were talking prior about validating, like that validation is
Mm-hmm.
so important. And so a lot of times when these emotions come up and we're working with subconscious is 95, maybe 97. I'd have to look up the latest research of our functioning. We have very little part of our consciousness. And so many times when we have these emotions, I don't feel like it's necessary that we have to go dig for them. But sometimes when we're having an emotion surface and we stop just for a moment, place our hand on our heart over our solar plexus and just breathe into it, those are sometimes parts of an old story or an old trauma, and being able to validate ourselves, because more than likely we never received that validation, maybe from an adult or maybe from our caregivers in our lives. And so just being able, I mean, I definitely recommend working with someone who can facilitate you through this as well. But just like you were saying, just holding space for just a moment to say, okay, I recognize this, I feel this, and it's uncomfortable. But something I recommend that my clients do is say, I see you, I hear you, and I promise that I'm never going to leave you. And when we say those words, we take a breath. I see you, I hear you, and I promise I will never leave you. There are those parts within us in the subconscious that energetically, emotionally, mentally start to shift back into that space of nervous system regulation. And it's amazing what we can do just in that moment. Like you said, that first step is mindfulness. But then when we can take that breath as we're sitting into the present moment and give a voice to maybe that emotion that doesn't feel so right and validate it just for that moment and breathe, our bodies can move into a state of regulation. And
Yeah.
of course, like you said, it's very important to have, if needed, to have a therapist, a counselor, someone who is trained as a practitioner in different healing modalities to be able to help you through this. But I feel like those are powerful things the audience can do at home
Sure.
to help them
Yeah.
be able to get through some of those things on their own.
Yeah. I think a lot of us grow up feeling like we have to do it alone, especially
Mm-hmm.
like if you notice that you tend to self isolate when you're suffering or struggling, or you don't like people to see you cry, like that might be an indication that when you had big emotions or you struggled as a child,
Mm-hmm.
you didn't have someone to hold space for you and be there with you. And so
Mm-hmm.
sometimes that's what's helpful in therapy is just having someone do it with you so you don't have to do it all alone anymore.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
but I love how you were describing saying I see you to the emotion, because that's kind of how I describe it to clients
Mm-hmm.
is emotions are like little kids and you
Mm-hmm.
can ignore them for a while. They get
Yeah.
louder, you know,
Mm-hmm.
that which we resist persists and they just
Yes.
come back louder. So taking that time to show that you see them, you hear them, and you will not ignore them
Mm-hmm.
for long. You'll come back to them and you'll pay attention to them because they are trying to communicate important things to us.
Yes. This is such a huge thing, because then can we start to move on to that pathway of healing, of being able to let go, especially with the work in Rapid Eye that I do with helping the body let go of stress, of trauma. Those are the key pieces of being able to tell the brain, tell those neural pathways, the cells in the body, that it's safe to let go. Because trauma, a lot of times I heard someone say, why can't they just get over that? And to me, I thought, wow, there's a lot of pieces that this person isn't seeing with how trauma really does impact our psyche. And what happens is when we do go through these moments that are very triggering, it can make the body believe as if it is in that same experience that happened in the original time period.
Mm-hmm.
And so these are great stepping stones to be able to help your body get out of a trauma response. Now, if you are going through trauma, I definitely recommend being able to find someone that can help facilitate you through especially deeply triggering experiences. But I feel like the mindfulness, the self compassion, being present, being able to see, hear, validate yourself are huge foundational pieces to then let go of traumatizing experiences as a
Yeah.
whole.
And that's why I think it's okay to start small and slow, until you kind of build your tolerance for that discomfort. Because I wouldn't actually recommend someone who's really triggered and activated in the moment to just be mindful. I don't,
Mm-hmm.
because that just might lead to overwhelm and re-traumatizing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, getting some skills and really grounding, and helping the nervous system calm down. Mindfulness is maybe something to practice in other instances, not when you're
Mm-hmm.
really activated and triggered. I think eventually it can get to
Mm-hmm.
that place, but maybe not in the beginning.
Yes, and especially for those of you that are listening, I just had this thought. I will include a link for a really helpful tool that can actually help the body if you are in more of that triggered state, especially feeling too triggered by mindfulness. A processes that I use with Rapid Eye that can help your body get out of that state, so you can come back into the present moment and do the five senses, right? Because the five senses can be an incredibly beautiful thing, but we've got to get your body out of a trigger before stepping into that practice. So I'll make sure to include that in the link for anyone that would like that. And I think the direction that I would like to go, if there's anything else you want to add here, Sarah, go ahead. But you were talking about being able to start out small, kind of those baby steps, because that helps us, I think, gain confidence, but also move into that resilience, that ability to grow. But being able to look at maybe some case studies or maybe clients or maybe your own personal experience
Mm-hmm.
where like you have found like transformative things that have happened, like what mindfulness did to shift for you and maybe
Mm-hmm.
some clients if you'd like to share that.
I think, you were talking about anger earlier, and anger is like my favorite emotion now because I see it as the underdog emotion that doesn't get valued enough and
Mm-hmm.
that gets demonized so much. So I guess I just have a penchant for the underdog, and anger
Mm-hmm.
feels like the underdog. But yeah, when I remember this one time when I was driving to school because it was like a 45-minute commute to the school when I was doing my master's program. And I was learning all this stuff about the religion that I was raised in, things that I had always been told were just like anti lies. And I was learning that they were true. And I just felt so betrayed and so angry. And at the same time, I was learning about mindfulness and how emotions aren't good or bad. And so as I was driving, it was kind of the first time I ever decided to just try to hold space for my anger and give it permission to be there. And I noticed in my body just this burning in my chest. And it really
Mm-hmm.
scared me, I think, because I hadn't really ever given myself permission to be angry.
Mm-hmm.
And it was quite intense. And I knew intellectually to just keep staying with it and that it would be okay. Emotions come in waves, they don't stay forever.
Mm-hmm.
So I tried to just really notice it in my chest and sit with it. And it felt like it just grew and grew and grew and got more and more intense. And then all of a sudden it exploded. And it kind of felt like I could watch it like leave the car.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it was the like most interesting experience. And I've never really felt it quite like that. But I think that was the first time I've really, I guess, found out for myself how it could work and how therapeutic it was to allow the emotion to move through me instead of fighting it and holding it in like I had for so long. So I think that's when I was like, oh, this is what it does. Like it really gave me that just powerful experience of how beneficial it could be.
Yeah.
And
And oh, so sorry about that. No, I feel like that, like when you are finally giving yourself permission to sit with anger, you actually have to, it's kind of like I see a person going through multiple curtains. It's like you actually have to be able to walk through the curtain of fear first, right? You have to go, oh, okay, I'm afraid of anger, first of all, and you have to kind of feel what anger, or excuse me, feel what fear feels like in your body. But once you like just exactly what you did, like I loved the way that you were like, okay, I was just gonna sit with this and trust that I wasn't gonna be there forever. Once you did that, it's like you moved through that fear curtain and then you sat with the anger curtain, and probably when you pulled that curtain back, you may have found maybe some other emotions, because a lot of times when we actually give ourselves permission to sit with anger, sometimes we do find sadness.
there's
We
more
might
below.
find deep
Yeah.
grief. We might find some of those other corners that then can bridge into letting that go, right? So once the anger burst its way out of your car, it may have been that catalyst to go, oh, now I can finally feel maybe some of the sadness or grief.
Or I mean, there's so much hurt and betrayal. Right?
Yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, as far as clients, I don't have anything specific, but I just think over and over again, what I hear from them is, um, oh my gosh, like I'm just human. It's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Like all these years of shaming themselves for just feeling things or just having a regular human response to things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I think it kind of stops us from fighting with ourselves and that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's a gateway into learning how to reparent all those parts, right? All those parts that weren't given permission to lie down on the ground and kick and scream and have a tantrum. It's like those parts of ourselves that get to come up, and we do it in healthy ways. Of course, there's healthy ways of expressing anger. But finally, like I said before, just placing your hands on your chest and saying, I see you. I hear you, and it's okay. It's okay to be angry, and I love you. I love you even when you're angry. And
Yeah.
so when we can let go of that judgment, it's so powerful, because then I think that then once we move through some of those curtains, we move through some of those experiences of some of the things that don't feel as comfortable, it does open up that new curtain into a new awareness. It kind of reminds me of The Wizard of Oz, um, where, I mean, I did not like that movie as a child. Like, oh, all the parts just scared me. And so, but that is kind of like a metaphor for life. And we have all these pieces where we're trying to run away from them or get away from them. But there really was such an empowerment, I think, for Dorothy as she was moving through, the whole entire experience, that by the time she got to the end and she sat with all those experiences, she really discovered what was kind of at the root. And it really wasn't all these things she had been told, right? It really wasn't some scary, scary man behind the curtain, you know. She pulled the curtain back and she's like, what? Like, this has been scaring me all along. And it was really that time where she like stood in her power, and it was those ruby red shoes. she had the power all along. I mean, the shoes weren't anything, it was within her. And so I think sometimes all of these outside forces that come through shame or fear, there are these corners and stuff that we're so afraid of, but when we do sit with it, we finally
Yeah,
get to pull the curtain back.
maybe this would be a good segue into just the myths around self-compassion. I think the things that keep from pulling the curtain back. Um, because I guess here's quite a few that I hear that I think are very common for us to be scared of when we think about dealing with our emotions or being self-compassionate. One is I'm scared that if I let the emotions exist, they will take over. And again, that's why I think we start slow and small, like because it can be kind of dysregulating to start sitting with things more. So that's like a fair fear. But also, I think people are surprised that and I think for me too, as I started allowing my emotions, they weren't nearly as intense or as scary as I thought that they would be. It's almost always worse than we think it will be, or we think it's worse than it actually is when we allow them. Another fear or myth I hear is I'll just be a bump on a log. Like I'll never do anything if I am, always validating my feelings and being self-compassionate. And I think there's a lot of good data. Actually, they've done quite a bit of research on this. Kristen Neff, who kind of built a curriculum around mindful self-compassion, has done research, as have others. And they show that people are more productive and more motivated the more they practice mindful self-compassion. If you think about like when you've been the harshest with yourself and critical, it's kind of paralyzing and it kind of keeps us stuck and overwhelmed and not wanting to do anything. So it's actually a bit of a paradox, but it creates more motivation and more productivity the more we are self-compassionate with ourselves.
Yeah, and I think it's transmuting fear into love, and love really is at that foundation of having self compassion. And so when we can ask ourselves the question, am I doing dot 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 because of fear, or am I doing this because of love?
Mm-hmm.
Life becomes such a different world when we do step into choosing love, being okay with breaking down those walls, moving through those curtains of this stuff that we've been taught for years and years and years, and being able to settle with it, but then getting to that and pulling back the ultimate curtain and going, oh, I don't have to do life this way anymore. I can actually shift this. This is the power that we have with cognitive skills, with that, the mindfulness practice, with CBT, with ACT, like all of these therapies that are out there. We get to become that driver, right? We don't have to allow the mind to be the driver any longer. Or that child, those past stories, we get to step into going, I can do this a different way. And it's a very empowering practice, because then I think that opens up the door for more joy as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm thinking too about what you said earlier about soft, like, I can't remember exactly how you worded it, something about being soft or weak or something with emotions. And I think something to keep in mind with self-compassion is there's kind of two sides to it. There's a yin and there's a yang. The yin is the kind of comforting, like what we walked through of giving yourself permission to have your emotions and validating them. Or what do I need? Maybe I need some kind of comfort right now. And the yang is more of a protective self-compassion. Love, you were talking about love. Love can look like comfort and it can look very protective and setting boundaries or fiercely protecting something that's not being protected by others, taking care of that for yourself. So I think that's another, when people worry that if I'm just nice to myself all the time, I'll just lay in bed all day. I think
Mm-hmm.
remembering that real love of ourselves is also saying, I really don't want to get out of bed, and I'm going to go ahead and push myself to do that. And I'll take a break later. But
Mm-hmm.
allowing ourselves to push out of our comfort a little bit, not to where it's overwhelming. And that's where the mindfulness can help guide us
Mm-hmm.
and know where we're at. But also challenge yourself too. Like it gets
Mm-hmm.
to kind of do both for us. Because that's really
Yes,
what love is, right? It's both. It's not just
it
always
is.
nice and loving and
No, love can be fierce. It can be powerful, and I talk a lot about the yin and yang concept, that masculine and feminine that we have from within.
Mhm.
And so, especially as we are taking those moments to see, hear, and validate those parts of ourselves, we get to play those masculine and feminine roles for ourselves. And so, yes, we need a balance of masculine and feminine in order to be balanced humans. And so, we get to embrace that, just like you were saying. When you feel like you need to kind of cocoon a little bit more and have more of like that chicken soup, and yeah, pull on some Netflix and get a hug. Like
Mhm.
lean into it and love all of yourself when you're in there. And once we can like rebuild some of those parts of our feminine energy, when love is at the foundation, not fear, that is the driver. That is the ability to go, wow, I'm I'm all that I've ever needed. Everything does come from within. And when we plug into that balanced feminine masculine energy inside of us, that pure love source, then do we have the motivation and that drive to be able to have action and to do these actions with empowerment, with joy, and to be a productive human on the planet. And so what's happened in society is we have been in such a very strong toxic masculine energy as well as toxic feminine, as we've gone into these opposite sides of the pendulum with our masculine and feminine qualities. And so when we take time, just like you've said, to lean into these practices, it opens up that space for us to start to step in healed and whole ways, not in the dysfunctional patterns of the past.
Mhm. Yeah.
So, that being said, I feel like we've really covered a lot of beautiful steps with mindfulness, self compassion, letting go of judgment. As we're wrapping up, I would love to give you an opportunity to maybe share if there is something that you have as a hope for maybe society moving forward in adopting mindfulness, self compassion practices in our mental health care field. Anything
Mhm.
that you feel you would like to see added?
I don't know if I can think. Oh, my iPad is about to die. I'll just tell.
Okay.
So I'll wrap up quick before it dies, hopefully. I think I like the direction that it's headed. I think just more people having more access to this. And because there's also good research showing that the more self compassion we have, the easier it is to hold space for others' emotions and have
Mm-hmm.
compassion for them. And like, who doesn't want that in the world? Like,
Mm-hmm.
we need much more of that. And I think too, there's so much internal damage and interpersonal damage that can happen when we are not aware of what's happening for us. And so that mindful piece, being able to be present with someone and with ourselves, we learn so much from it. And as we just distract from that constantly, it's only gonna like not serve us. And so
Mm-hmm.
I would just hope that it would, there'd be more access across the board. But I think
Mm-hmm.
there's good research out there, and I see it showing up a lot in the mental health field, and I think it's just great, and I want to see more of it.
Absolutely. And I really appreciate your perspective. I appreciate your expertise, bringing that to the table so that the audience is able to take, their own steps of empowerment to know that they have the ability to transmute some of these experiences of life, hard experiences,
Mm-hmm.
and to step into a space where they do have a way to heal. And so, just like you were saying before, using those formal practices, but starting out with baby steps as well. And as we, as adults, make these changes, we show up, we heal these parts of ourselves, we make a stronger future for coming generations. So, anything you'd like to say as we wrap up?
No, I mean, just adding on to what you said about being able to teach children, like so much of what we learn starts there, and so many of
Mm-hmm.
how we think about ourselves and how we see ourselves in the world, that's where it starts. And so,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I just love when adults learn this and then they can extend it to their children. And yeah, it's great.
So powerful. Well, it has been a pleasure to have you today. And I thank you so much. Like I said, these are great foundational tools. And sometimes it's not always in these extensive tools. Sometimes it is about just taking a step back and staying with the simple.
Mm-hmm.
And so remember that mindfulness isn't about controlling your thoughts, it's about creating a space to witness them. And self compassion isn't about necessarily being soft on yourself, it's actually being true to yourself. It's coming home to your sovereign soul. It's discovering that innate wisdom that has always been within you, and you get to reclaim these parts of yourself through deep practice. They're actually sacred doorways into this sovereignty that we focus so much on, and they help us soften that grip of judgment, reconnect with our emotions, and step into that balance of feminine receptivity and that masculine stability. And so, if this episode stirred something in you, I invite you to begin small, a breath, a pause, a kind word to yourself. These are seemingly simple acts of how to reclaim your power moment by moment. So, thank you again, Sara, for being here. Thank you to the audience for joining us. And until next time, keep choosing your truth, keep honoring your humanity, and keep walking the path back to yourself.
Thanks, Cynthia.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for listening to the Discover Divinity podcast. If this podcast resonates with you, I invite you to check out discoveringdivinity.com. You will find resources to reclaim your sacred, sovereign spirituality. Here, you can join the Discover Divinity community, where we have free online community classes, as well as done-for-you courses and programs. Navigating the unique personal path to wholeness can feel overwhelming at times. If you would like further support or are ready to take your healing empowerment to the next level, I offer one-on-one intuitive sessions in a variety of different packages where we will discover, release, create, reclaim. Discover your innate wisdom that lies within. Release the imbalances that prevent you from living your truth. Create harmony in body, heart, mind, spirit, energy, and relationships. Reclaim your sovereign soul. It is time to discover new possibilities. It is time to discover you.